Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another webinar chat. I am so thrilled to be joined tonight by Dr. Angelique Ridore. She is an OBGYN and certified menopause practitioner. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
I'm so excited to be here, especially this exciting topic now that I'm getting older and, and I need all the things that we're going to be talking about.
It is it does enhance the experience to be seeking out the best therapies for patients that also can help you.
Exactly.
It has been a big motivator as for me as well. So menopause, as listeners at home know, is often associated with many problematic symptoms like hot flashes, sleep problems, mood disorders, sexual dysfunction, weight gain, changes in cognition. And previous webinar chats have focused on traditional therapies for some of these symptoms. However, many of our patients often will seek complementary or alternative therapies. And a lot of times, patients are getting their information from internet searches or word of mouth, and that can feel confusing. I know it's confusing for me. And so tonight, what we hope to do is talk about some of these non-traditional or non-conventional therapies. And while neither Dr. Ridore or me are, I would say, experts in the field of alternative medicine, I think it's safe to say that we both have an interest in this space. Dr. Ridore, what did spark your interest in some alternative ways of approaching menopause symptoms?
In addition to my patients kind of asking for alternatives, either because their medical conditions warranted it and conventional hormone therapy was not something that was recommended for them, but it also stemmed from my upbringing. I am a first generation Haitian American, and I grew up in a household that was surrounded by natural remedies, from ginger root to aloe vera to turmeric to cinnamon, everything. I grew up hearing my grandmothers talk about the various teas and cleanses and herbal baths that you could do. I wish I took notes back then, that's for sure. And so that has also driven when I'm always like, I wonder what sort of natural remedies, because I look at some of these plants as they're just allies in our healing, and they can improve our health as a nice adjunct.
That's so awesome. And I could relate to that. My family will still chew on a clove of garlic for strep throat before they'll take the penicillin. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we can talk about some specific common symptoms. And as always, listeners at home, you have the opportunity to message in any questions that you have related to this. And Dr. Ridore and me will be seeing these questions and we'll try to get to as many as possible. But maybe to start, if you stepped back as some general advice for patients who are entering midlife and wondering, okay, what are some of the basics in terms of maintaining overall health and vitality as we get older, what do you typically tell your patients?
I think the most important thing to optimize our health through the menopausal transition and then beyond is a healthy diet. After all of the 45 essential different vitamins and minerals that we need to live and to thrive, we can find them from our food and our nutrition. So a balanced diet, such as the Mediterranean diet, is a go-to one that I commonly recommend, or the DASH diet, which is geared towards heart health. Both of these eating styles, they have tons of fruits and vegetables, and they provide us with the ingredients that we need. And if we had this balanced diet, many of the supplements and vitamins that we may be talking about today really wouldn't be necessary because you would be able to get it from your food.
Mhm.
And then of course, there's all the other basic things that we should be doing: remaining active, exercising, no smoking, not drinking excessive alcohol, and then always wearing sunscreen. So those are the extra, but definitely diet would be the top.
I completely agree with that. Whenever patients, um, when patients are having pretty much any issue, I always like to say, okay, let's step back and think about what your foundation of health is like. And I believe it starts with diet, good sleep, having stress relief in our life. So, um, interestingly, I love that you mentioned alcohol because um, a few webinars ago, we talked about the role of alcohol in overall health, and we think that a little bit of alcohol might have some benefits, but really, it's more like a piece of chocolate cake. Yeah, it might improve our mood and have some short-term benefits, but the long-term health consequences are not that great.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to excessive or a heavy pour. And
Mhm.
for some people, I mean, it wrecks their sleep patterns, which has all of these, downstream effects.
And I think it's even more relevant to midlife women because so often patients will say, I used to be able to have a glass of red wine, and now it gives me hot flashes. I get a really bad headache from it. And I do think that as our bodies change, we can become less tolerant of some of those things, that some of those habits that we used to be able to do without a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so one of the most common problems that my patients will come to me seeking help for, and I bet you can relate to this, is I haven't changed anything about my exercise routine. I'm eating healthy, but I can't stop the weight um, from coming on, and it's it's so frustrating for so many patients. And I have a few things that I usually go through with patients, but I'm curious to see what do you usually talk with patients about from a holistic standpoint about trying to optimize their weight.
Absolutely. This is extremely frustrating. As our hormones change and we age, our metabolism changes for sure. And the things that worked for decades, they tend not to work anymore. Um, in addition to what I mentioned regarding the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet and just having a healthy balance, sometimes I talk to my patients about a concept known as intermittent fasting, and not an extreme version by any means. If you think about how our descendants were hunter gatherers and they had large portions of their day in which they fasted, that's kind of like our metabolic roots, if you will. We're not usually eating at midnight, 11 p.m., etc. And we usually fast so our bodies can go through that resting, digesting phase. And so incorporating that and going back to our roots, if you will, and where you're getting fasting periods anywhere between, 10 and 16 hours where you're fasting and kind of consolidating your eating period is a strategy that is helpful for some patients, not just for, maintaining their weight, but it's also helpful in terms of the way they feel. Some people have even touted that it improves their cognition, decreases inflammation, decreases pain, and helps them to sleep. So that's one strategy that I often will recommend. And patients will dabble with different ways to do it in terms of moving their eating window around to see what works best for them. I don't know if you have any experience with intermittent fasting or what your thoughts are on that. I know it's been in the media and it's been quite the buzz strategy.
It is, and I happen to be a big believer in the health benefits of it, but it's a little unconventional compared to what we learned in medical school, which is kind of energy in, energy out, and exercise more, eat less, which I don't 100% believe that. And so I do think that Anecdotally, I've seen midlife patients do really well with intermittent fasting. In fact, I would say the number one reason patients will message me and say, this has been life changing, has been because of this. Um, and there's so many different ways of doing it. Some patients would like to do like a long fast once or twice a week, and then others will do um, like a 10 hour, 12 hours, up to even beyond, several days a week. And even if it's as easy as, instead of eating breakfast starting at 8 a.m., try to, wait till 9 a.m. and then the next day 10 a.m. I've found that to be really be a healthy, free way. I think that's the big thing. It doesn't cost any money, and there are a lot of health benefits to intermittent
Absolutely.
fasting.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show so much of what our conventional wisdom and knowledge was about nutrition, about weight, about obesity, is changing. And that whole energy in, energy out mindset, we really know that for those patients that have struggled with weight their entire lives, I'm one of them. um, it's not just that simple. It's not that simple calculation. And, managing excess weight is really like a chronic medical condition in a lot of instances. And once we put on some of that weight, our bodies really want to cling to it. And it changes our metabolism in a lot of different ways. Not to stray from our topic of complementary medicine, but that's another thing I do talk to patients who have been struggling with weight, is to kind of rethink about the way they're looking at their excess weight and potentially managing it differently. We don't tell patients that have high blood pressure over and over and over, diet and exercise, diet and exercise, diet and exercise. It's like beating the dead horse. We're saying the same thing all the time, and sometimes it's not delivering results. And so I do also partner with people at weight management, providers at weight management, to help support patients during the menopause transition, particularly if they've struggled with weight for a long time.
Yeah, we do have a lot of good resources, including a wonderful medical weight management team. So we have some interesting questions from our audience. One is, when you're doing intermittent fasting, can you count the hours while you're sleeping? And yes,
Yes,
that's the best part.
absolutely.
Yep,
Yep, they're included.
they are very much included. And then another participant is asking, when doing intermittent fasting, how long is best? I've been looking online and it's difficult to find a perfect recommendation. Do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. The approach that I often recommend to people is, in the beginning, not to commit to any fasting cycle and actually trial, 1 to 2 weeks of different patterns and see what works best for you, both for your lifestyle and both for results. And then kind of sticking with that for a little while. And sometimes some people will find they actually even have to switch it up. Something's worked for a really long time, and then they notice that it may not be working as effectively. And so changing it up. So we're all wired a little bit differently. So I think that there actually is no intermittent fasting pattern that works best for one size fits all. And it's really best to kind of trial it out, a couple different ones. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to make it too complex. I think start with what you can handle, because if you can't do it, then it's not going to work, right? So I think at first is taking an inventory of your lifestyle. Sometimes your career may really dictate, your children's schedules with sports may dictate what that may look like for you. And then choosing a couple of different ones and then trialing it out and see which one gets the best results.
I love that answer, because there's so many different ways of incorporating the strategies behind intermittent fasting that there's very likely a method that could be incorporated for I think pretty much everyone. So even though it might not be everybody's cup of tea, I do believe that some of the little strategies, like even if you're not eating a lot of calories, if you're putting things that are sweet in your mouth, you're causing an insulin spike. Those are things I think a lot of women do. We're not necessarily eating all day, but we might be, preparing food for somebody else and taking a little snack. So we could probably spend all night on this topic alone. But the three books that I love are Delay, Don't Deny by Jen Stevens, The Obesity Code by Jason Fung, and Boom, Boost Our Own Metabolism by Dr. Gary Oken. Any resources that you have for your patients?
I use all the ones that you suggested. Yeah, and I think that they're wonderful.
So along the same lines, I whenever someone is trying to lose weight, I like to talk about sleep because I think a lot of women, particularly in midlife, struggle with good sleep hygiene. And when we're sleep deprived, I don't think a lot of people realize that we boost up our cortisol levels, and that just adds to struggles with weight loss. So jumping into the topic of sleep, what holistic things, like what's your initial approach and recommendation to patients that are wanting to improve their sleep quality and maybe quantity?
So first is some very basic lifestyle things, taking an inventory of their sleep hygiene, looking at what their sleep routine is. Some women or people will be affected by shift work, night shift, swing shifts, etc. So really taking a look at that and what their challenges are, and optimizing it from a lifestyle perspective first. And this is probably not one that's particularly surprising to people because it's commonly used, widely used as melatonin, is widely used to support sleep. Melatonin is actually a hormone that is going to regulate the rest activity cycles that we have. And so do you typically recommend melatonin as well?
I do. And very often patients will say, I've tried it, it didn't really make a difference. But I think in combination with some of the other supplements that you'll probably mention shortly, it it can it often can have a synergistic effect. And there's it's there's biological plausibility that maybe melatonin can help with cell rejuvenation.
Mm-hmm.
So has some other benefits as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How much do you have patients generally start with?
So I am a moderation type of person. I will have some patients say that 10 milligrams of melatonin. I usually recommend starting with 2 is what if they're melatonin naive, if they never used it before. Since melatonin is much more commonly used, sometimes I'll have people obviously start higher, but I usually start with 2 and then titrate up from there. What's your go-to?
Um, Anywhere from 2 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone's really sensitive, I recommend the kids version. That's 1 milligram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have had patients go up to 10 milligrams a day, which is a pretty high dose, I think. But I think up to 5 milligrams nightly is not an uncommon dose.
Yeah, some high doses can actually exacerbate depression. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. And then some people can have some side effects from it as well, whether it be they're obviously fatigued or a little bit more lethargic throughout the day. Because eventually it kicks in, even if they don't feel like it's working effectively, it kicks in later in the night, and then it makes it harder for your brain to wake up. And interestingly, I feel like over the past week or two, I've actually had a couple of questions related to can you become dependent on melatonin? Like, will you become addicted to it? There's really no data that suggests that, you would become addicted to it per se. But it loses its effectiveness for some people over time, or some people find that once they stop it, initially they have some difficulty falling to sleep, especially if they haven't adjusted or optimized their sleep pattern.
Yeah, that is it. I'm glad that you touched on that. And I also think that a lot of patients have kind of gotten into the habit of not sleeping through the night, for multiple reasons. And sometimes, so some patients will sometimes ask me, if I start this, does this mean like I'll never get normal sleep without these supplements or remedies? And possibly, if you don't take it, it'll go back to what it was before you started. But my hope is that just getting your body back into the rhythm of sleeping throughout the night, is in and of itself beneficial, and might carry over even when you don't take that supplement.
And do you find that you have to remind people that, like, we need sleep, like 8 hours of it?
Oh my, everybody, and this is mostly my family, but people will stick to their guns and say, no, I only need 4 hours. That's all.
Yeah.
And what I tell my patients is, you almost all humans need 8 hours uninterrupted sleep. And even when we feel like we can function on less, most studies will prove the opposite, that there are declines in our cognition and functioning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the questions in the chat was related to how long before bed do we recommend taking the melatonin. Melatonin affects everyone differently. I usually recommend about 1 hour or so before bed. I don't know what you recommend, Melanie.
Yep, same thing. And then I think we all could potentially respond differently. So I tell patients, see how it makes you feel. I have for melatonin and some of the other supplements I think we'll be talking about soon. Some patients like to take that instead of like a glass of wine when they're making dinner, and it helps them relax. And then others like to do it right before bed, and that's how they have the best effect. I don't know that any of the supplements are going to be like an abrupt sleeping aid type of effect, where you have to worry that if you did take it a little earlier, you're going to be zonked out.
Mm-hmm.
But since they are going to promote sleep, it wouldn't be ideal to take it and then go like drive a bus or.
Yeah, but I definitely think taking it before you anticipate sleeping. I know some people run into trouble when they try to get to bed, they can't fall asleep, they've been up for 2 hours, and then they take it, and that's when they run into the grogginess in the morning, because you may be taking it at midnight at that point in time.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And a participant is asking, do you need to take it for a certain amount of time before you see the effect? And my answer would be not necessarily. You may start to see benefits really quickly. And if you don't see benefits right away, I would say just give it some time before, at least a few days before going up to the next highest dose. But don't necessarily just give up on that particular supplement because you haven't seen an immediate effect. What would you say to that, Dr. Ridore?
Absolutely. I would agree with that approach for sure.
And someone is suggesting a weighted blanket, which is another great option.
Absolutely. Except if you have hot flashes.
Yes.
So you're a covers on, covers off, covers on, covers on person. Sometimes that might be a little bit, the weighted blanket makes it harder to get out of the covers, but.
Yes, for those patients, the cooling blanket that I just learned about today, I didn't know this existed, but there is a cooling blanket that is pretty inexpensive, and it's not electric at all, but it does stay cool, and that would probably be a better option
Yeah,
for patients with hot flashes at night.
yeah, especially if you have night sweats. And yes.
Okay, so my favorite sleep promoting supplement is magnesium. How do you feel about it?
100%. I think magnesium is very helpful, not just for as a sleep aid. If you have leg cramps, etc., I think it's also helpful. But yes.
And do you have a favorite formulation? Magnesium is always bound to something else, mag citrate, mag glycinate, mag threonate. What's
So,
your
so I haven't found a favorite go-to one. I often will kind of guide people based on the side effects, because a lot of magnesium is a cathartic. It gets your bowels going. And so sometimes people will report those adverse side effects depending on, especially I find that more with mag citrate. I don't know if that's what you notice as well. So that's kind of how I guide people. Do you have a favorite go-to that you like?
I don't, but I usually say the formulations you'll probably find at your local store will be like mag citrate or magnesium glycinate, and they tend to have the most GI side effects. It has a smooth muscle relaxing effect. So if you need a little boost to have regular bowel movements, this will be good for you.
Yeah.
But if it's too much, then I found that magnesium threonate has less GI side effects. They market it as like a cognitive booster. And I don't know that I believe that that formulation is any better than any other magnesium formulation, but it does tend to have, I think, lower GI side effects. There's a great question that came through, which is, if I'm having hot flashes at night, will melatonin help with that? Which So what I would say, it's really interesting. Hot flashes rarely occur when we're in that deep stages of sleep. So anything that promotes good sleep is going to decrease the frequency of hot flashes. And it becomes a vicious cycle because we probably, a lot of us don't have great sleep habits to begin with, which makes it more likely to get those nighttime hot flashes. And then that is going to disturb our sleep more. And so that vicious cycle, you can start chipping away at it with things like melatonin and magnesium.
Absolutely. And, preparing for beds, are some strategies for hot flashes in general, but also for prevention of night sweats with, a sleep routine that involves some cognitive behavioral therapy, and really working through some exercises to reduce stress and promote well-being, make you calm before you go to bed, that also has been shown to decrease the frequency of those nighttime awakenings that people experience.
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy is, I think, an often overlooked therapy that can be so effective, is evidence-based for so many menopause symptoms. And we are so fortunate to have great behaviorists at WellSpan who can help with so many of these issues.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's difficult to get in for 8 weeks of sessions. There are even some resources where you can do kind of like self-guided behavioral therapy. There was one randomized study that was done on a particular technique. It's a book that you can find on Amazon, Managing Hot Flushes and Night Sweats. It's based out of a study done in the UK, and it's a cognitive behavioral self-guide to menopause. And so it kind of walks you through some exercises. It has you keep a sleep journal and a symptom journal to kind of help work through some of those things that you would normally work through in conventional sessions.
That is a great resource. I hadn't known about that.
Yep.
So for patients who might be interested but not yet willing to commit to meeting with a therapist, that's a great resource.
Yeah.
That question was a great segue into hot flashes. But before I skip to this next topic, is there anything else that we didn't mention about sleep that we should?
Can't think of any others. Are there any others that you're thinking of?
No, not besides the approach of having good sleep hygiene, making sure the room is dark, either using an eye mask or covering the blue lights from the charger, trying to work with a partner who might be snoring or a dog that's moving and keeping you up all night. I think it's not uncommon to be a little more sensitive to these sleep disturbances. And what I can't emphasize enough is that good sleep is life-changing. And if women can identify what is disturbing their sleep, it can make a huge, that helps us be able to tackle it and then get you on the road to waking up feeling refreshed and your best self. So that's about it for sleep. So hot flashes. Yikes. So hot flashes they're the prototypical reason why patients probably come to see me and Dr. Ridore when they are going through the midlife transition. And there's a lot of reasons why hot flashes are disruptive of our quality of life and possibly even significant health parameters. But one of the big downsides of hot flashes is how they take away our good sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And so for patients who are having hot flashes and we've gone through lifestyle modification, we've told them to try to dress on the cooler side. And I tell patients, have a glass of ice water and, touch it, hold it throughout the day, drink cold beverages, avoid triggers for you. If that's not effective, and we have gone through some of the typical pharmaceutical therapies that are available to patients, are there options that you talk to your patients about that would be over-the-counter supplements or other methods for tackling hot flashes?
Absolutely. There's several different strategies, supplements that can be used. Unfortunately, in the supplement space now, we are going to be talking about some herbal products. They are not always well studied, and there are mixed results in the studies that we do have. So we have some very proven conventional therapies, but when we're looking at some of our alternative therapies, there's some that show some promise. Many of you may have heard of a very common line of over-the-counter products. And I'll mention periodically as we get into this part of the discussion some brand names. I'm not endorsing any. I don't have any relationships with any of these, but it may come up. So this line of products is called Estroven, and you may have seen it at your local pharmacy. And they have different herbal ingredients in the different formulations. And so one of them has hapnic rhubarb. Hapnic rhubarb has been used in Germany for well over 20 years, and we think it has some effect on the estrogen receptor. As I mentioned, in studies, there's been mixed results. Some have shown that it really effectively, helps with hot flashes, and others not so much. I think that's because hot flashes are multifactorial, and it's probably, some may be generated more related to the lack of estrogen, but there are also other reasons why women who are perimenopausal and menopausal are experiencing hot flashes, which is why some of these things don't don't work consistently. But that's one particular option. A newer product to me is a product called Relazin, which is pollen extract. It's actually a product, this one is made out of Sweden, but I believe they try to adhere to some of the FDA-ish standards that we have here in the US. Do you have any experience with pollen extract?
I do. I have had patients find benefit from it more for some of the mood changes that can accompany um, menopause, uh, but it can also potentially be beneficial for hot flashes.
Mm-hmm. Another one that's helpful for mood, but as well as sometimes hot flashes, is ashwagandha. I feel like ashwagandha has been recommended for a lot of different things. It's an adaptogenic herb that is helpful for hormone balance. And so that's why we think it may have somewhat of a role for helping with hot flashes, but it also is helpful for stress and mood swings. How are we doing on the chat?
I've been while you've been talking, I've been trying to
Okay. All
answer
right.
some of these.
And then there's a slew of others. So black cohosh is one that studies have shown that it's not as effective, but for hot flash and night sweats, it can be useful. Evening primrose has some weak stimulation or estrogenic properties, if you will. So we think that it can boost some of the estrogen, relieving symptoms or that we may experience as the estrogen levels decline during menopause. And then there's tons more: ginseng, flaxseed, omega-3s, pine bark. I don't know if you have any experience with any of these others, but this is not one size fits all. I have some patients that will use some of these products and they will find a lot of relief of their symptoms. And I have some patients that this does not do the trick.
I agree. I have patients who this is the best thing since sliced bread, and these supplements have been enough to alleviate their symptoms and they haven't required anything extra. I usually don't see those patients because they don't come to see me, so I'm a little biased. What I more often hear is it helped for a small amount of time and then it just went back to what it was, which I think is consistent with what a lot of the data shows. But if I have a patient who can't take some of the more conventional therapies, then I do try to exhaust many of the supplements that you mentioned. So I think it's worth bringing up the difficulty with supplements because patients will often ask me, what brand should I buy? What's the best one? What's your response to that question?
First, I think it's important to understand how supplements are regulated in this country, which is why it seems like it's the wild, wild west of supplements. So supplements are not regulated like other food products, other medications, biologics, medical devices in the same way. And the best that we have is that the US has a designation of USP or NSF, which is from the National Science Foundation, which certifies the manufacturing process of some of these supplements. So it's basically kind of saying that, yes, there is some sort of quality control process for verifying the purity and the safety of the batches, but not the efficacy. It's not saying that we're guaranteed that it works for any particular claim. Supplements don't have to prove that. But there is a major problem in the supplement industry where what's inside the bottle is not always what's matching the supplement label. And I've even had patients who have used the supplement they purchased off of, an online retailer, and then they go for a second or third order and it's not working, or they feel different. And sometimes because there's some variability in the manufacturing process. So that USP or NSF designation is helpful. The National Science Foundation actually has a website where you can search. If you just search NSF certified dietary supplements on like a Google search, you'll be able to see which different providers of supplements are actually standing and kind of adhering to that standard. So there's tons and tons on that website. I usually recommend using one that's made by one of those manufacturers, because at least you're going to get some sort of quality control.
I 100% agree with what you said. Those products that have that certification tend to be a little pricier, but I do think it's worth it in order to give these products a fair shot. It's worth investing in a decent, high quality supplement.
Mm-hmm. And not all of them are the super designer ones. There's a $1 million business in supplements right now, and there's a lot of very attractive marketing online. But even some of these brands you can find at Target that do carry those designations.
Yep. A great question that came in is, how long do you need to stay on these supplements in order to see a benefit?
It's going to vary per supplement. I usually feel like the good college try is 3 months. I don't know what you typically recommend, Melanie, when trying something out like a supplement.
I don't disagree with that, although I usually say if you're into the first bottle and you haven't seen any effect, then it's not looking great. And I think it also depends on what you're taking the supplement for. But if you compare it to some of our conventional treatments, for hot flashes, we have pretty quick responses to those treatments.
Yes, that is true.
So if after the first 30-day supply, you're not feeling any different, it's not wrong to give it a 3-month try, but unless you could start being a little suspicious, it might not be beneficial. Another great question is it harmful to mix multiple supplements like the black cohosh and the estrogen, or the plant-based estrogen, and ginseng?
So first I'll say, when I said estrogen is a line of products, and I think in the chat somebody mentioned Amberin, many of those products actually come in different formulations that do just that. They combine several different items that I mentioned together into one formulation. So it is okay to mix and try different ones. One thing I would caution is that sometimes read the back of your combo package one. Sometimes it'll have black cohosh in it, and then you're adding additional black cohosh, that sort of thing. So just make sure you read the packaging and the supplemental ingredients so you really understand what you're putting in your body. And then lastly, if you have chronic medical conditions, particularly hypertension, heart disease, you really want to keep an eye on what's happening with your body and just kind of have surveillance of changes, because some of these supplements can have an impact on your blood pressure. And there are some supplements that can also have blood thinning effects. So patients that are on blood thinners, need to have caution for some of these things, especially if you're on Coumadin or warfarin. It can really impact the metabolism of the medication that you're taking. But otherwise, it is okay to mix and match.
And the one other thing I'll add is more isn't always better. And sometimes when things aren't working, we want to double the dose. but some of these can have like pharmacologic effects, meaning some of the plant-based estrogens, if you take enough of it, it's going to have a similar effect as a prescription estrogen would have. And there are there are important consequences to that. So I think that it's always best to review your supplement list with your providers, and I would caution you to go above what the daily recommendation is unless you have discussed that with the healthcare team that you work with.
Mhm.
A patient is asking for us to define what are the conventional treatments. I've been mentioning them a few times, and for hot flashes, the conventional treatments that I'm referring to would be hormone therapy using estrogen and possibly progesterone if needed, compared to some of the non-hormonal treatments that have data that they are effective at preventing hot flashes. But these would all be prescription medications as opposed to over-the-counter supplements and alternative therapies that we're talking about tonight. Okay, so time is flying. Dr. Ridore, if we have a few more minutes on to tackle any other topic that is related to what we're talking about tonight, your choice. How would you like to end our evening?
I know we're running low on time, but I would like us to take a stab at mood disturbances. And talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that is a biggie, and there are some, potential alternatives that some people may find helpful.
I love that one. And I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of patients feel significant mood changes when they are going through the perimenopause and menopause transition. And you start to wonder, like, is it me? What's happening? I feel like something's a little off. And there's so many reasons why those mood disturbances happen. One big reason could be that you're not sleeping well.
Yeah.
So, very going back to that point. But for some of the mood changes, what are some of your recommended treatments?
So the first thing I usually will take a look at is vitamin supplements, actually. I will often recommend an omega-3 fatty acid like fish oil to make sure that's incorporated, not just for prevention of depression or patients that may be on mood medication and antidepressant, a class of medication known as an SSRI. The omega-3 fatty acids or fish oils seem to potentially be helpful. And it also is good for your heart health. It's an antioxidant. There are a lot of other health benefits to that particular supplement. So I will recommend adding that. I will take a look at, do we have enough folic acid in your diet? And if not, do we need to go ahead and supplement? And then we'll look at some other complementary and alternative things. One is something called SAMe. It is S-adenosylmethionine. I always botch that. And it's a metabolite of folate, and it can be helpful for depression. It also has been studied in patients with OA or osteoarthritis to be helpful. And, usually a dosage of anywhere between 800 to 1600 milligrams per day is something that patients will find useful. What about you? Anything that you use?
Well, after beating the dead horse of sleep and magnesium to help you sleep, some rely the pollen extracts. I've had patients find benefit from it. St. John's wort. Those would be the two that I usually will mention to try. All right. I feel like we, we, we what I feel like we could talk all night about all of these topics, and I I think, Dr. Ridore, that this is an indication that we should do another webinar in the future on some of the things that we haven't touched on. Um, so
Yeah, I definitely feel like we scratched the surface here. So we probably need another follow-up to, hit brain fog and concentration and some of these other topics that we didn't get to chit chat about. This has been really nice. It's been really wonderful to hear some of the different things that are working for you and your patients.
and it's so great that you were able to share some of your insight and wisdom about things that we might not, see in a textbook, are the you know conventional methods. But I think just knowing that there's a lot of possible options out there for patients, and that there are clinicians like yourself who are so open to talking about it. So I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. And hopefully we're going to have you back for round 2.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.